YouTube really changed everything, and it meant that, straight away I could look for these competitions that had, happened in the past that people were constantly uploading. And it was the early days of YouTube, so I could keep on top of all of the content that was coming out, because there wasn't a lot of it. And it was, in the beginning, it was the Olympic Games and the big competitions, but then you started to see training footage, and you got early adapters of YouTube that started putting their own training on. And one of the things I always used to do for years, and I bet other gymnasts used to do this, every now and then I just go on YouTube, in the search bar I just type Kohei Uchimura, and then whatever year it was, and I'd just scour the internet almost every day to see whether there was a new Uchimura video that came onto the internet. And it's interesting because that really had an influence on my gymnastics, and I didn't know it at the time, but what I was doing was I was gaining an advantage on all the people around me. And it probably wasn't until I got to the age of 16, 17, 18 where this really paid dividends. I remember turning 17 and I was starting to learn a release and catch move on the high bar. So I was starting to learn a Kovac. And Sergey wanted to teach me a very traditional Russian-style action technique where there's not a lot of movement going on. You're pretty straight. You move the bar up and down. Fundamentally, it works. One of my favorite gymnasts of all time, Alexei Nemov, it's very similar to the technique that he used. Artur Dalaloyan, he does it with a Russian gymnast right now. But for me, I'd already started to study these Japanese gymnasts from an early age. I was obsessed with how cool Japanese gymnastics looked. And Uchimura had just burst onto the scene. And he was doing these really powerful actions on high bar, and his Kovacs were just, half a meter higher than everybody else's. And I decided that's the way forward, that's the future, And I had these disagreements with Sergey over a period of time where I said, Sergey, I don't want to learn the traditional Russian action. I want to learn this Japanese action. But Sergey, he didn't know how to teach me that. He wasn't happy that I wasn't following his advice and learning what he'd taught before, I guess. But I was confident. I was convinced this was the right way in the right direction, and it was a new direction people were going to go in gymnastics. So I stuck to my guns, and I basically said to him, Sergey, can you give me 1 month? I'm going to teach myself this action. And he wasn't happy, and whenever we'd go on the high bar, he just wouldn't talk to me. And I stayed on the shiny bar, and I would strap myself in with the gloves and loops. I'd do like a set of 5 Kovac actions. I'd go back, I'd watch it, I'd study it. I'd go back, I'd do it again. I'd do it with ankle weights on. I did this for about a month. So I'd do my normal, the agreement between me and Sergey was that I'd do my normal high bar session, but at the end of the day, I was allowed to go on shiny bar and do my own thing and work on this action. So after about a month, Sergey must have seen some progress. And I said, Sergey, I want to try it on a chalk bar. He said, okay, you can try it. Started trying it on the chalk bar and was getting some early success straight away. So Sergey was kind of in then. He had bought into it because he could see I was making some improvements quite quickly. So I started learning this action and perfecting it. And if you go back and you look at my very early YouTube videos, so around this time, 2009, 2010, was when I first started uploading content to YouTube. You can see the action and you'll be able to see how it's evolved over my career, It very much was a trial and error type thing. And back then, there was a lot of movement, I was flying over, arching, moving my head quite a lot. And if you look at my last competition at the British Championships 2019, my action's very smooth at that point. I've kind of ironed all the creases out. But that was a real, example of when I used that analysis and studying the sport and watching myself back and trying to improve myself. And I would go home, if there was a skill I wanted to learn, I would type that skill into YouTube, or I'd think of a gymnast I knew that did that skill and I'd watch it again and again and again, just to try and give me some kind of a head start on learning that skill in the gym. And I think it made a real difference. And other ways in which that really helped me, that analysis and studying the sport and being a scholar of the sport. When I first went to competitions, so when I turned 17, 18, I was making my senior debut. I knew what all the other gymnasts in the world were doing. I knew it because if there was ever any video of anybody doing anything online that was gymnastics involved, I'd watched it. So when I'd go to these big competitions and I'd turn up at 17 with all the best gymnasts in the world, so the World Championships, for example, in 2010 in Rotterdam when I went as a reserve, I used to watch a lot of the gymnasts around me and some of my teammates sometimes, and they'd see the big skills that somebody from, say, the Japanese team or the American team were doing, and it would put them on edge. They'd be nervous. They'd think, oh my God, they're doing such harder gymnastics than I'm doing right now. Whereas for me, when I turned up, I knew what they were going to do anyway. So it never surprised me. It always helped me keep calm. So I think that was a real advantage in the early days when I was younger and I was making that transition into the senior squad. And another example, perfect example of that, I guess, was I met, while I was training at Loughborough, a guy called Damien Walters. He was a tumbler and he'd gone on to do lots of stunt work. So he now works in big blockbuster films. But he was a really, really nice guy and he was super interesting. And he'd come in every Tuesday and they'd train on the tumble track. And I can remember one day having a conversation with Damien Walters and we were both on the trampoline. I can't remember what I was doing, but I think I was trying to do triple twisting double backs off the trampoline. So a difficult skill. And he was doing some skills as well. And we had this conversation. He explained to me how he believed that when he was a kid, he'd learned to twist the wrong way in his tumbling, and as an experiment, and I think that was it, or it had been that he was trying to teach one of his tumbling athletes to twist the other way. So as an experiment, he tried to do it himself. So he'd spent his whole career doing tumbling, and he's competed at the highest level for Great Britain, and he tried to learn to do everything the other way. And he explained to me that he kind of switched his mindset and his technique and his kind of thought process behind doing these tumbles. And he now was trying to do a half in, so a half twist in the first somersault, and then a 2.5 twist or a 1.5 twist in the second somersault. And I asked him, why are you doing that like that? I've never heard of anyone say that before. And he said, well, when I do this half, I can see the floor the whole time. And then when I do the 1.5 out, same thing. I never lose sight of the floor. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So what I then did was went back to YouTube, typed in Kohei Uchimura and started watching his tumbles on floor. And I realized he was doing the same thing. He was doing it a little bit differently. So he was doing a 1.5 twist and then a front half twist out. But it meant he never lost sight of the floor.